November 12, 1945. A frozen field outside Augsburg, Germany. The world is supposed to be at peace, but here, in the ragged heart of the vanquished Reich, the war whispers on. For Private First Class David Cohen of the 45th Infantry Division, the sound of that whisper is the wind, a relentless, razor-sharp gale sweeping across the Bavarian plain. It tears at the canvas flaps of the deuce-and-a-half trucks lined up on the muddy track. It bites through the wool of his M43 field jacket, and it carries a scent he has come to know all too well, a mix of damp earth, diesel exhaust, and the faint, sour odor of human despair. He stands with his squad, M1 rifle slung over his shoulder, watching the wire. Beyond it, in a makeshift enclosure of mud and trampled frost, are the prisoners, 580 of them, all women. They are not the usual collection of weary civilians or displaced persons. These are the SS Helferinnen Corps, the female auxiliaries of the Schutzstaffel, camp guards, administrators, signal operators, the administrative sinew of a monstrous regime. Now they are just figures in threadbare gray uniforms and captured greatcoats, huddled together against the encroaching dusk. They form a single shivering mass, a wall of defiance built from bone and bitter pride. The order is simple: move them. Get them out of this squalid transit pen and onto the trucks, which will take them to a permanent winterized POW camp before the first heavy snows make the roads impassable. But the women refuse. For 6 hours they have refused. Captain Miles, a wiry officer from Ohio whose face is a roadmap of exhaustion, has tried everything. He has stood on the hood of his Jeep, barking orders through a bullhorn until his voice was raw. The German words, learned from a pamphlet, came out stilted and harsh. "You will form a line. You will board the trucks immediately." The words were swallowed by the wind, met only with a collective, unnerving silence. He tried reason, explaining through a reluctant German translator that a blizzard was coming, that this was for their own survival. They stared back with eyes like chips of ice, their faces impassive masks of contempt. Sergeant Kowalski, a barrel-chested veteran from Chicago who had seen the inside of Dachau just months before, tried his own brand of persuasion. He walked the wire, his voice a low growl, promising consequences. No food, no water, nothing but the cold. The threat had no effect. It was as if they welcomed it. Now, as the bruised purple light of sunset bleeds across the horizon, a new sound rises from the enclosure. It starts as a low murmur and grows into a unified, rhythmic chant. Lasst uns in der Kälte sterben. Let us die in the cold. The phrase is repeated over and over, a litany of self-destruction. It is not a plea, it is a demand, a final, fanatical act of loyalty to a dead ideology. The young American GIs shift their weight, their boots sinking deeper into the freezing mud. They exchange uneasy glances. They were trained to fight soldiers, to take ground, to face machine guns and artillery. They were not trained for this psychological siege against hundreds of starving, freezing women who would rather die than accept help from their conquerors. PFC Cohen watches a young woman near the front, no older than himself. Her face is pale and gaunt, her lips chapped and blue, but her eyes burn with a feverish intensity as she mouths the words along with the others. He can't understand it. He has seen the newsreels from Bergen-Belsen, the photographs from Buchenwald. He knows what these women were a part of. He should feel nothing but righteous anger. But looking at them now, seeing them choose a slow, agonizing death in a muddy field, he feels a disquieting sense of futility. Captain Miles throws the bullhorn into the passenger seat of his Jeep with a clatter. His patience is gone. He stalks over to Sergeant Kowalski, his breath pluming in the frigid air. The conversation is short, sharp, and grim. The time for request is over. The temperature is dropping with the sun. Soon it will be a matter of life and death, whether the prisoners want it to be or not. A new order is coming. Everyone can feel it, and no one knows what will happen when it does.
The decision is made as the last sliver of sun vanishes behind the skeletal fingers of a distant forest. The temperature, already brutal, plummets. The wind howls with renewed fury, carrying the first stinging flakes of snow. Captain Miles's face is grim, etched with the strain of command. He can't let 500 prisoners freeze to death on his watch. It's an unacceptable outcome, both for the Army's regulations and for his own conscience. But forcing them is a nightmare scenario. The press, the Red Cross, the very idea of it. American soldiers physically manhandling German women, even these women, into trucks. It's a headline he doesn't want written. He tries one last time. He orders the mess sergeant to prepare hot coffee and stew. The rich, savory smells drift over the wire, a stark contrast to the biting cold. For a moment, you'd think this basic human appeal might work. A soldier, a young private from Tennessee, carries a crate of steaming mugs to the gate, his expression a mixture of duty and apprehension.
He offers one to the women nearest the wire. They stare at the steam rising from the mug, then at him, their expressions a cold fury. One of them, a gaunt woman with lank blonde hair, spits on the frozen ground at his feet. The private recoils, his face flushing, and retreats from the date. The food is rejected. The gesture of humanity is thrown back like a stone. Next, Miles orders the trucks to be turned around, their headlights aimed directly into the enclosure. A dozen powerful beams cut through the gathering darkness, pinning the women in a harsh, unforgiving glare. The engines rumble, a low, threatening chorus against their defiant chant. The idea is to disorient them, to break their unity with light and noise. But the effect is the opposite. Bathed in the stark light, their shadows long and distorted behind them, they seem to draw strength from the confrontation. They huddle closer, their voices growing louder, more resolute. Lasst uns in der Kälte sterben. The sound is hypnotic, maddening. It's a collective will against which orders and logic seem to shatter. PFC Cohen watches from his position, the collar of his jacket turned up against the wind. The glare from the headlights illuminates the faces in the crowd, stripping away the anonymity of the mob. He sees the fanaticism, yes, the years of indoctrination carved into their features. But he also sees something else. He sees the chattering teeth, the uncontrollable shivering. He sees the patches of frost forming on their hair and the shoulders of their coats. He sees the desperate animal instinct for warmth, warring with the ideological demand for martyrdom. His grandfather had left Germany in 1936, a tailor from Berlin who saw the darkness coming and got his family out. He had told David stories not of monsters, but of neighbors, friends, ordinary people swept up in a tide of hatred until they drowned in it. Looking at these women, Cohen doesn't just see the enemy, he sees the terrifying end result of that tide. A jeep pulls up behind the line of trucks, and a medical officer, Captain Abramson, jumps out. He confers quickly with Captain Miles, his words lost in the wind and the engine noise, but his gestures are clear. He points to the prisoners, then makes a motion of someone collapsing. The first cases of severe hypothermia are setting in. The situation has crossed a critical threshold. It is no longer a contest of wills. It is now a race against time. Sergeant Kowalski begins moving down the line of GIs, his voice low and urgent. All right, listen up. We're going in. Form 2 lines. No rifles. We're going to carry him if we have to. Be firm, but no unnecessary force. Get him on those trucks. A wave of apprehension runs through the soldiers. This is what they had feared. A messy, chaotic, physical confrontation in the dark. A fight no one could truly win. The women in the enclosure see the soldiers beginning to form up, and a change ripples through them. Their chant falters, replaced by a low, menacing growl. They are no longer a wall of passive resistance. They are becoming a cornered animal.
The order hangs in the air, thick and heavy as the diesel fumes. We're going in. For the men of the 45th, it's the command they've been dreading. They begin to form into squads, their movements stiff and reluctant in the biting cold. They aren't soldiers preparing for an assault. They look more like men being led to a gallows. They unsling their M1s and lay them carefully in the backs of the trucks, the clatter of metal on metal sounding unnaturally loud in the tense silence that has fallen between the engine noise and the wind. Their weapons are gone, but their apprehension remains. They are now armed only with their orders and their own 2 hands. Inside the wire, the women react instantly. The shift in the Americans' posture is unmistakable. The time for waiting is over. Their huddle tightens, shoulders locking, arms linking. They become a human barricade. The defiance in their eyes hardens into something more visceral, a mix of fear and feral resolve. A tall, severe-looking woman with graying hair pulled into a tight bun, clearly their unofficial leader, steps forward slightly. Her voice, sharp and commanding, rings out over the others, cutting through the wind. Niemand bewegt sich. Nobody moves. Wir sterben hier als deutsche Frauen. We die here as German women. Her words act like a tonic, stealing the nerves of those around her. The collective shivering seems to subside, replaced by a rigid, defiant stillness. Captain Miles watches, his jaw tight. He knows he is on the edge of a precipice. One wrong move, one soldier losing his temper, and this fragile situation explodes into chaos. He gives a nod to Sergeant Kowalski, who takes a deep breath and bellows, "All right, first squad, move up to the gate, slowly." The GIs advance, their boots making sucking sounds in the half-frozen mud. They look impossibly young under the harsh glare of the truck headlights, boys tasked with cleaning up the mess of a war their father's generation had fought. As they approach the wire gate, the women's voices rise again, not in their rhythmic chant, but in a cacophony of jeers, insults, and curses.
The German words are sharp and ugly, filled with a venom that has survived the complete and total destruction of their nation. PFC Cohen stands in the second squad, waiting for his turn. He watches the scene unfold with a growing sickness in his stomach. He sees the futility, the sheer, tragic waste of it all. This isn't a rescue. It's becoming an assault. He glances at the faces of his comrades. They are tense, angry, and confused. They are being asked to use force on unarmed women who are already half dead from the cold. The enemy is defeated. The war is over. Yet here they are, on the brink of another ugly battle in a muddy field in the middle of nowhere. He looks past the first line of defiant women to the ones in the back. He sees a girl, couldn't be more than 16, her face streaked with dirt and tears. Her eyes are wide with a terror that has nothing to do with ideology. She is just a freezing, starving child caught in a trap she doesn't understand. Something inside and snaps. It's not a conscious decision, not a thought-out plan. It's an impulse, born of a deep, profound weariness with the hatred that has consumed the world for 6 long years. The orders, the regulations, the entire military structure around him seems to fade away, leaving only the raw human core of the problem. He looks at Captain Miles, screaming to be heard over the din. He looks at Sergeant Kowalski, his face a mask of frustration. He looks at the shivering girl. And then he moves. He doesn't move forward with his squad. He takes a step sideways, away from the formation. The action is small, almost unnoticeable in the chaos, but it's a deviation, a break in the pattern. Sergeant Kowalski, ever watchful, catches the movement out of the corner of his eye. His head whips around. "Cohen, what in the hell do you think you're doing? Get back in line." But Cohen doesn't hear him, or if he does, he doesn't listen. He has already taken another step, his gaze fixed on the wall of prisoners, his mind set on a course no one could have possibly anticipated.
"Cohen, I gave you an order!" Sergeant Kowalski's voice is a roar of disbelief and fury, but Private First Class David Cohen keeps walking. He moves with a strange, deliberate calm, leaving the ranks of his fellow soldiers and stepping into the no-man's land between the American line and the prison enclosure. The shouting from both sides begins to falter as all eyes, American and German, turn to this lone figure. He is a target, isolated in the stark beams of the truck headlights. Captain Miles opens his mouth to yell, to have the private arrested for gross insubordination, but the words die in his throat. There is something about the way Cohen roves that is utterly mesmerizing. He stops about 10 feet from the wire gate. He doesn't look at his captain or his sergeant. He looks directly at the hundreds of hostile women staring back at him. Slowly, methodically, he reaches up and unslings his M1 rifle from his shoulder. The gesture sends a ripple of shock through the onlookers. Is he going to threaten them? Fire a warning shot? But he does neither. With a quiet reverence, he stoops down and lays the rifle on the frozen, muddy ground. The wooden stock and steel barrel, symbols of his power and his authority as a victor, are now inert, offered up to the earth. He straightens up, his hands empty at his sides. He is unarmed. He is vulnerable. He is just a man in a soldier's uniform, facing down an army of ghosts. The enclosure falls completely silent. The wind is the only thing that moves, whipping at Cohen's jacket and carrying the stinging snow. He takes a deep, ragged breath, the frigid air burning his lungs. And then he begins to sing. The sound that emerges from him is not what anyone expects. It's not a battle hymn or a patriotic anthem. It is quiet, fragile, and achingly familiar. He sings in German. The words are soft, the melody simple, a tune that has been passed down through generations. It is a lullaby. Schlaf, Kindlein, schlaf, he sings, his voice thin but clear against the wind. Sleep, little child, sleep. Der Vater hüt die Schaf. The father watches the sheep. The effect is instantaneous and profound. It is as if he has thrown a switch in the collective mind of the prisoners. The German words, coming from the mouth of an American soldier, are a deep and surreal shock. But the song itself strikes something far deeper. It bypasses the hardened shell of ideology and strikes at the bedrock of memory. For a moment, they are not SS Helferinnen in a POW camp. They are little girls in their bedrooms, their mothers and grandmothers tucking them in, the gentle melody a promise of safety and love in a world not yet torn apart by war. The stern-faced leader stares at Cohen, her mouth agape. The fury in her eyes is replaced by a profound confusion. She tries to shout, to break the spell, to remind her women of their duty to hate. But the words won't come. The lullaby has disarmed her more effectively than any weapon could. All around her, the wall of defiance is crumbling. Faces soften, hard-set jaws tremble. A young woman near the front, the one Cohen had noticed before,
lets out a choked sob, then another. The hatred, the pride, the fanatical resolute, it all evaporates, leaving behind only the cold, miserable, and exhausted human beings they truly are. The song continues, a single thread of shared humanity woven into the fabric of a brutal night. Cohen's voice doesn't waver. He holds their gaze, not as a conqueror, but as a witness. He offers them not an order, not a threat, but an echo of a life they had all but forgotten.
The last notes of the lullaby hang in the freezing air, as delicate and fleeting as a snowflake. For a long moment after David Cohen stopped singing, there was only the sound of the wind and the low rumble of the truck engines. No one moves. The American soldiers stand frozen in their half-formed lines, watching the scene with a sense of stunned reverence. Captain Miles and Sergeant Kowalski look at each other, their faces illuminated by the headlights, a silent and profound understanding passing between them. They have just witnessed something far outside the scope of any field manual. Inside the wire, the transformation is complete. The unified mass of defiance has fractured into 500 individual points of sorrow. The women are no longer a collective weapon of ideology. They are simply women, cold and broken. The tears that had begun to fall now flow freely, freezing on gaunt cheeks. The low sobs are a sound more devastating than any shouted curse. The spell of their self-imposed martyrdom is shattered, replaced by the crushing weight of their defeat, their loss, and their exhaustion. The tall, gray-haired woman who had been their leader stands with her head bowed, her shoulders slumped. The fire has gone out of her. Then a single movement breaks the tableau. A woman in the middle of the crowd, her face hidden in shadow, slowly, painfully pushes herself to her feet. Her joints are stiff from the cold, her movements clumsy. Without a word, without looking at anyone, she begins to walk toward the gate of the enclosure. Then another woman follows, and another. A slow, silent, somber procession begins. There was no order given, no push from the American soldiers. They simply get up and start moving towards the waiting trucks, their heads down, their defiance washed away by a simple song. Sergeant Kowalski quietly gestures for his men to open the gate. They move with a new sense of purpose, not as guards forcing prisoners, but as men facilitating a rescue. They guide the women towards the trucks, some offering a steadying hand to those who stumble. The women do not resist. They do not even make eye contact. They climb into the back of the deuce and a halves, huddling together on the wooden benches, not for solidarity, but for the simple, desperate need for warmth. PFC Cohen bends down, picks up his M1 rifle from the mud, and slings it back over his shoulder. He walks back to his squad, his face unreadable, and melts back into the line of soldiers. He doesn't look for praise or acknowledgement. He simply did what had to be done. As the last truck is loaded, the snow begins to fall in earnest, thick white flakes that swirl in the headlights and begin to blanket the empty, trampled field. The tailgates are secured, and with a grinding of gears, the convoy begins to pull away, its red taillights disappearing one by one into the snowy darkness. Captain Miles walks over to Cohen. He stands before the young private for a moment, the silence stretching between them. "You broke a dozen regulations tonight, Private," he says, his voice quiet. "That was the finest act of insubordination I have ever witnessed." He claps Trowan once on the shoulder, then turns and walks back to his jeep. The soldiers climb into their own vehicles, the mission finally impossibly complete. They leave behind an empty enclosure of mud and wire, soon to be covered in a cleansing blanket of white. The rescue had failed until one soldier chose not to fight the enemy, but to remind them of who they used to be. It was not a victory in any traditional sense. There was no surrender, no triumph. It was something quieter, more profound. A brief, fragile moment when the crushing machinery of war was halted by a whisper of shared humanity, an act that risked discipline but in the end restored a small measure of dignity to everyone present on that frozen field.